Hi everyone, my name is Kelly Schultz with Signed and Sealed, and today we are doing a deep dive into the ways that I think wedding planning is shifting for couples who are planning this year. It's the beginning of a brand new year. I think we're all doing lots of thinking and reflecting about what's to come in 2026, so I thought it would be a good time to share some thoughts with you from my vantage point as a wedding planning consultant and coordinator here in Metro Detroit. So to kick this off, I want to share a couple of observations on how planning in 2026 looks different than in years past. So the first thing I'm observing is that couples are being more intentional about choosing and curating experiences at their wedding rather than just simply maximizing guest count. So it's really a budget trade-off decision, right? So more couples are prioritizing unique, elevated, memorable experiences for the guests that they have there, rather than simplifying their plans to have a huge guest count. The second thing I'm observing is that couples are honestly having more of a grasp on budget realism versus what I'm going to call Pinterest fantasies, which is a good thing. Myself included, we all love scrolling Pinterest and seeing all of the over-the-top wedding designs and cool things, but I am finding that couples are starting to understand that those elements are just not realistic for most weddings, and they're keeping their expectations more in check about what they can really do here and with the budget that they have. But now with that, we're asking ourselves, how do we find that balance of incorporating parts of the cool things that we see on Pinterest with our own vision and bringing the heart of it to life in a more realistic way? And personalizing it. Of course, no one wants their wedding to be a carbon copy of exactly what they've seen someone else do. So that in itself, I think, is requiring couples and planners to think more creatively. The key takeaway from those two observations, I think, is that couples who are planning a wedding in 2026 need a smarter strategy, not just a longer checklist of a million things to do. I think it's important to plan strategically so that couples are not reacting impulsively and emotionally throughout the entire process. So very short shameless plug, but I think that's exactly where Signed and Sealed's planning support program can come in to help. During our planning support meetings, we're constantly talking about prioritizing and keeping decisions and tasks streamlined, what has to be done now versus what can be done later, and making realistic decisions that we can actually bring to life on your wedding day. As a planning consultant, I'm always trying to think 2 steps ahead so that you don't have to. The second topic really that I want to address in this video is are the various shifts that I'm noticing in planning timelines for 2026. So what to book earlier and what can wait as opposed to previous years. We know that not everything can happen at once. I always very much encourage my couples to spread out the decision-making process with their vendors and with the various tasks that go into wedding planning over the course of the entire planning period. It's not realistic monetarily, mentally to do all of it all at once at the very beginning. So here today, I want to outline a few key shifts that I'm going to be implementing with my planning support couples starting this year. So starting with the things that I would recommend pushing earlier into the planning process in 2026 versus what might have worked well in years past. The first thing would be booking a DJ. DJs are considered a core vendor, of course, for many weddings, and with some couples gravitating towards longer planning timelines, they're naturally just locking in their DJs sooner, making choices more limited as weddings get closer. I'm also seeing that DJs in the highest demand, in our area at least, are taking on less weddings per year to avoid burnout. They can charge more per event, so they don't need to focus on quantity as much as quality. They don't need to book several weddings per weekend. So I am recommending, with that said, that my couples look at DJs sooner than they did in the past. Another one would be special entertainment elements like wedding painters, right? So there's, of course, a very finite supply of these specialty vendors, and if couples have something specific in mind, it's very much to their advantage to book it on the earlier side. Another one is hair and makeup. Again, there are limited top-tier artists in any given area, most of which are only able to take on 1 wedding per day, timeline-wise. And with most couples wanting to avoid travel fees, of course, you want to look early. Most brides have a very specific vision in mind of what they want for hair and makeup, and it takes some time to sort through many photos and reviews online to, find your top picks and land on a vendor that you're really happy with. So I recommend starting this process earlier than we might have thought was appropriate in the past. Another fun one that falls into this bucket is florists, and even more so, bouquet preservation. Very limited number of skilled local artists to preserve bouquets, and they tend to book up fast. So that's why I'm recommending that if this is something a bride is interested in, we don't overlook it early in the planning process. And the last thing would be cake or dessert vendors, especially if you have a peak date, in the midst of wedding season between May and September, October, especially on a Saturday. On the flip side, as I mentioned, I am still very much in the camp of recommending to my couples that you spread this out. You cannot do everything all at once. Something has to give, some things have to wait. So in order to keep the process balanced and calm, here are the things that I am recommending couples actually save until a little bit later, as opposed to what I used to recommend. So the first one would be shopping for shoes and a veil and jewelry and accessories for the bride. This was something that I used to encourage brides to get off their plate early just so they don't have to worry about it later. Save the work, just take care of it now. But I'm finding that many brides actually prefer to wait until their dress arrives. As some of you might know, oftentimes in a bridal gown shop, you order your dress and it's many months till it comes back in and you see it again. So brides are wanting to wait until it arrives and they can put it back on, and that helps them envision things a little bit better and then choose their accessories. And that is totally fine. Unless a bride wants something really specific or custom, it's fine to handle accessory purchases much closer to the wedding day. Another thing that can be handled later is attire for your wedding party for the bridesmaids and groomsmen. So wedding parties are just usually not in the mindset of securing their attire until the wedding gets closer, as much as, us type A planners would want them to. It's just not realistic most of the time. So while I used to recommend trying to handle this way early in the process of the planning process, again, just to get it off your plate and get things handled, a lot of my couples are tending to push this a little closer to the event, which is working out just fine. I still recommend that the bride and groom start thinking about this early so that, they have a plan and they know what they want and they're really clear on their vision sooner in the process. But having the wedding party actually get their attire closer to the wedding, of course, with clear deadlines that you can follow up with people on, it's fine to wait until that's closer to the wedding as well. Another one is purchasing wedding bands. This is, I think, a really fun day to go out and, pick out your wedding bands together. Most of the time, this can be handled pretty close to the wedding, within a few months of your wedding date. Again, unless you want something really customized, you're usually good to hold off on that until later. And then finally, purchasing smaller decor items. So in the world we live in of super quick online ordering and deliveries, everything's at your fingertips and it's on your porch within a week, basically. You can purchase smaller decor items like candles and table numbers and things like that in the final months before your wedding. By that point, you have a pretty clear handle on the big picture elements of your day, your vision, you've got your florist, you've got everything locked into place. So it's actually easier to build out those smaller details in the final months before your wedding day. The last thing that I'd like to cover today are wedding trends that I'm seeing emerge more and more in 2026, and I expect to continue rising, that are majorly impacting planning decisions. So I'm not talking about surface level color and design trends that are pretty easy to implement. These are bigger picture trends that I'm seeing now from real couples as a planning consultant. And these are things that you'll want to consider from a high level early on in the planning process. The first trend is weekend-long celebrations for couples who want to spend more time with their guests outside of just the wedding ceremony and reception itself. So this might look like including all of your guests in a welcome party or a welcome drinks event, a post-wedding brunch, a picnic the next day, anything like that. So with this trend, couples are going to want to consider how this is going to impact your budget for the wedding, as every additional event throughout the weekend tends to add a fairly significant cost, especially if you want to include a good number of guests in each of these events. And also just the overall energy level or vibe of the weekend, both for yourselves. How are you going to be feeling throughout this whole weekend? Along with the experience for your guests. Does it give them enough downtime? Are they gonna be up for all of these different events? There's no right or wrong answer necessarily. It just depends on your individual situation, how you want that weekend to feel, and the overall personalities of your guests, I would say. So I would just encourage couples to be thoughtful about how they want the weekend to flow before overcommitting and overplanning. The other trend that I believe is having a major impact on planning decisions is a focus on sustainability throughout the process. I hesitate to even call this a trend. I feel like it's more so a conscientious lifestyle decision, but couples overall, a lot of them are becoming more aware of the environmental impact of their wedding day. And this can really be woven into so many elements of your big day from top to bottom. So if this is something that resonates with you and this trend is important to you, I would say make it a priority at the beginning of your planning process. Start with that and build your vision from there. Talk about how this is going to impact each element of your wedding day. As just a couple of examples, certain venues could be considered more sustainable. And that's a decision you're gonna be making pretty close to the beginning of the process. Places like naturally beautiful spots outside require less energy consumption, less decoration because of the beautiful scenery. Places like conservatories or botanical gardens or even the zoo, where your money may actually be going to support eco-friendly causes, which of course is a good thing. Maybe you're shopping for a pre-loved wedding dress. Maybe overall you're choosing to marry locally versus a destination wedding, especially if most of your guests are local, to avoid the environmental impacts of everybody traveling. When it gets down to smaller details, maybe you're putting sustainable brands on your registry. You're asking guests to donate to your favorite cause rather, in lieu of gifts, or you're choosing sustainable favors like seeds that people could plant in their garden, fun things like that. So there's so many ways to do this. All of that is to say that the trend of having a sustainable wedding is really something that couples are going to want to be thinking about from the very beginning of their process through the very end, if it's something that's important to them. So thank you so much for joining and tuning in to hear my perspective as a wedding planning consultant and coordinator as to what I think wedding planning really looks like in 2026. I encourage you to share this video with any engaged couples you know who may be working on planning their weddings this year. I would also love to hear your thoughts on all of this in the comments, what you agree with, what you disagree with, what you're seeing. And of course, I'm always available to chat further if you are an engaged couple via a consultation call. That's available to any couples in the country, but especially those of you based in the Metro Detroit area, which, as most of you know, is where I'm based as well. You can learn more about my services and connect with me via my website, which is signedsealedbyschultz.com. Thanks again.